This chilling tale isn't just a figment of imagination, but a story I stumbled upon while working at the Fairmont Empress in 2016. The events that unfolded in this historic hotel sent shivers down my spine, and they still haunt me to this day. It all began on a quiet, foggy evening. I was on the late shift, tasked with closing down the third-floor conference rooms. The hotel was unusually silent, except for the faint sound of water dripping from the aging pipes, echoing through the long, dimly lit hallways. As I rounded the corner, I felt a sudden chill creep up my spine, a sensation that I later learned was common among staff members who had experienced something paranormal. While I was tidying up the last room, I overheard whispers coming from the adjacent hallway. My heart raced. It was just past midnight, and there shouldn't have been anyone else on the floor. I took a deep breath, telling myself it was probably just my mind playing tricks in the eerie silence. But curiosity gnawed at me, pulling me toward the sound. When I stepped into the hallway, I was met with a sight that froze me in place. At the far end, a shadowy figure stood just beyond the reach of the flickering lights. It seemed to be a man in a vintage suit, his face obscured by darkness. Panic set in as I realized I wasn't imagining things. The whispers grew louder, an indistinguishable murmuring that echoed through the hall, wrapping around me like a cold embrace. Gathering my courage, I took a hesitant step forward. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently before plunging the hallway into darkness. The whispers transformed into frantic pleas, and I felt a rush of cold air whip past me. My instincts screamed at me to flee, but I pressed on, determined to uncover the source of the haunting. As I approached the figure, the air thickened with an oppressive weight. My heart hammered in my chest, and I could feel the dread pooling in my stomach. Just as I reached the spot where he had been standing, I stumbled upon a forgotten old ledger propped against the wall, its pages yellowed and brittle. The entries were dated back to the early 1900s, detailing the mysterious disappearances of several guests over the years. Each account ended with an eerie note: "He watches from the shadows." I was paralyzed, the reality of what I was reading sinking in. Before I could comprehend what was happening, a cold hand gripped my shoulder from behind. I spun around, only to find nothing there. The temperature dropped, and I could see my breath fogging in the air. The whispers intensified, and a sense of urgency gripped me. It felt as though the hotel itself was alive, urging me to leave. I bolted back to the front desk, adrenaline surging through my veins. I was breathless and trembling, desperately trying to rationalize what I had just experienced. I confided in my colleague Jenna, who had worked at the Empress for over a decade. She simply nodded, her expression a mix of sympathy and understanding. "You're not the first one to see him," she whispered, eyes darting toward the entrance. "They say he was a guest who never checked out." In the following weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Shadows flickered at the edge of my vision, and I heard the whispers even in my dreams. Every corner of the hotel felt suffocatingly familiar, yet hauntingly alien. I found myself avoiding the third floor, but no matter how hard I tried, the unease lingered. One night, I decided to face my fears head-on. Armed with a flashlight and my phone, I ventured back to the third floor, determined to confront whatever haunted me. As I stepped into the hallway, the air thickened, and the temperature plummeted. The whispers returned, swirling around me like a tempest. In a moment of sheer terror, I shouted, "Who are you?" The whispers abruptly ceased, replaced by an unsettling silence. Suddenly, the shadowy figure emerged before me, clearer than ever. His eyes, hollow and sorrowful, bore into mine, filled with an unending longing. In that instant, I felt an overwhelming wave of despair wash over me, an echo of his unfinished business. The world around me faded, and I was plunged into a vision. I saw glimpses of the past frantic guests, secret meetings, and an unspeakable tragedy that had unfolded within the walls of the Empress. It was a life he could never escape, and I was the unwitting spectator of his torment. The vision snapped back to reality, leaving me breathless and shaken. As I stumbled back, I realized the truth. He wasn't just a ghost, he was a prisoner of the hotel's history, and I had unwittingly opened a door that should have remained closed. I ran, my heart pounding, the weight of his sorrow still pressing on my chest. To this day, I can't step foot in the Fairmont Empress without feeling the cold grip of his hand on my shoulder and hearing those haunting whispers. The hotel stands tall, its history woven with shadows and secrets, waiting for the next unwitting soul to uncover its dark past. I left my job shortly after, but I still wonder, will he ever find peace, or is he forever bound to the halls of the Empress, whispering to anyone who dares to listen? I don't really know where to start with this. Maybe with the fact that I've never believed in ghosts, spirits, or any of that paranormal nonsense. But after what's been happening to me, I'm not sure what I believe anymore. It started a couple of months ago, just after I moved into this old house on the edge of town. It was a small place, cozy with big windows that overlooked the backyard. Quiet, perfect for someone like me who just wanted a bit of peace after leaving the chaos of city life behind. I had always liked the idea of living alone, where I could relax and maybe finally write that book one been dreaming about. But peace isn't what I got. I court. It was around the third night when I first saw it. A shadow moving outside the window in the hallway. At first I brushed it off, figured it was just a raccoon, or maybe the wind pushing a tree branch against the glass. It's an old house, after all, and I'd already noticed how the floor creaked like it had a mind of its own. But something about that shadow didn't sit right with me. The way it moved slow, deliberate, not like an animal, almost like someone was watching. I tried to ignore it. People see weird things all the time, right? A trick of the light, a reflection from a car passing by. That's what I told myself. But every night around the same time, the shadow came back, and each time, it got closer to the house. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but by the end of the first week I'd stopped sleeping. I stayed up late, staring at those windows, just waiting for the shadow to show up, and it always did, moving slowly along the edge of the yard, like it was circling the house, looking for a way in. It wasn't until last Friday that I got the courage to check outside. It was around 2 a.m. and I was sitting in the living room, pretending to read. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, even though I wasn't moving. When I finally stood up, my legs felt like lead. I didn't want to go near the windows, but something inside me, some twisted curiosity, forced me to look. I regretted it immediately. The shadow wasn't outside anymore. It was standing at the window, pressed up against the glass, not just a shape, but the outline of a person. And it was looking right at me. I couldn't see its face, there was just this dark void where its features should have been, but I knew it was watching me. I stumbled back, nearly knocking over a lamp. When I blinked, the shadow was gone. Just like that, as if it had never been there at all. But I knew what I saw. That's when the noises started. First, it was small things, a creak here, a knock there. I tried to convince myself it was the house settling, even though I knew better. The sounds came at odd times, always when I least expected them. A tap on the windows in the middle of the night. The groan of footsteps upstairs, even though I was the only one living near. I couldn't take it anymore. I called the realtor, hoping to find some logical explanation. Maybe there was an animal problem or some kind of structural issue. But she hesitated when I mentioned the noises, and then she dropped the bombshell. Apparently the house had been built over an old graveyard. She laughed it off like it wasn't a big deal. Just one of those old town legends, she said. Most of the graves were moved years ago. Most, not all. That's when I started talking to the neighbors, the ones who had lived here the longest. They were friendly enough, but their smiles faded when I mentioned the house. One old man, Mr. Jacobs, wouldn't even look me in the eye. That place has a history, he muttered. You should be careful, girl. After that, things got worse. I stopped going near the windows at night. It didn't help. The shadow, whatever it was, started making its way inside. I would hear it, late at night, moving through the house. Sometimes I'd wake up to the sound of heavy breathing, just outside my bedroom door. Other times, I'd hear the unmistakable creak of floorboards bending under the weight of something or someone moving closer. One night I felt it. I was lying in bed, barely drifting off, when I felt something cold brush against my leg. I froze. It wasn't the breeze, the windows were shut. It felt like fingers. Thin, icy fingers running slowly up my calf. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just lay there, feeling the cold creep up my skin. It stopped just above my knee, and then it was gone. I never saw it again after that, but the noises never stopped. They only got louder. Sometimes I can hear voices, whispers, echoing through the walls. Other times it's the unmistakable sound of nails scratching against the windows, trying to get in. Last night was the worst. I heard footsteps in the hallway, heavy and deliberate. They stopped right outside my bedroom. I could feel my pulse racing as I waited for the door to creak open. But it didn't. Instead, I heard a voice low, barely a whisper, but clear enough to send chills down my spine. It said my name. I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know if I'll make it through another night, but I'm writing this now because I need someone to know. Someone has to know what's happening here. Maybe you won't believe me. I wouldn't have believed it either a few months ago. But now, I'm not sure I'll ever feel safe again. Because whatever it is, it's still out there, and it's getting closer. Well, I've always been a sucker for yard sales. Something about rummaging through other people's forgotten junk, hoping to find a hidden treasure, has always appealed to me. So when my wife, Kelly, suggested we check out the estate sale down the street, I didn't hesitate. The house was old, the kind that creaked when the wind blew too hard. It had been empty for years, ever since the old lady who lived had passed away. They were selling everything: furniture, clothes, trinkets, you name it. But it was the small stuff that always caught my eye, the personal items that told a story. And that's when I saw it, a doll. It was sitting on an old rocking chair in the corner of the room, looking like it hadn't been touched in decades. The porcelain face was cracked in places, its painted eyes dull and faded. But there was something unsettling about it. Its clothes were old-fashioned, and the way it slouched slightly in the chair made it look almost too lifelike. Kelly immediately shook her head. No way, that thing is creepy. I laughed it off. Come on, it's just a doll, probably worth something too. The old woman running the sale overheard us and shuffled over. You like that one, do ya? She asked, her voice raspy with age. Maybe, I said. Where'd it come from? The woman's expression darkened slightly. That belonged to the little girl who lived here before. Died, must have been 50 years ago now. Tragic thing, she was only 8. I felt a shiver creep up my spine, but I didn't want to seem superstitious. What happened? Fell ill. Never recovered, the woman replied, her voice low. That doll was her favorite. Always carried it around. Her mother couldn't bear to part with it after she passed. Left it sitting in that chair ever since. Kelly nudged me. Let's go, seriously. But there was something about the doll that fascinated me. I don't know if it was the story or just my curiosity, but I couldn't walk away. I bought it for $10. We brought it home and placed it in the corner of our daughter Emma's room, mostly as a decoration. Emma, who's 5, wasn't too keen on the doll, but she didn't protest either. She already had a collection of toys that she played with, so the doll mostly sat there untouched. That first night things felt off. It started with small things. Emma's other toys, the ones she'd usually leave scattered across the floor, would be neatly arranged when I checked on her before bed. At first I thought she was cleaning up after herself. But when I asked her about it, she just shook her head. I didn't do it, Daddy. Maybe it was the doll. I chuckled. The doll? Huh? She nodded seriously, her eyes wide. She likes my toys. That comment stuck with me. I didn't mention it to Kelly, not wanting to spook her, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Then the whispers started. Late at night, I'd wake up to faint, high-pitched voices coming from Emma's room. It sounded like children playing, soft giggles followed by quiet shushing. I'd get up, open her door, but there was never anyone there. Emma would be fast asleep, her toys sitting exactly where they'd been earlier. One night, after hearing the voices again, I decided to stay up. I sat in the hallway, just outside Emma's room, waiting for something to happen. Hours passed, and just as I was about to give up and go to bed, I heard it, the sound of small feet shuffling across the carpet. I stood up, heart pounding, and slowly opened the door. The room was dark, lit only by the faint glow of her nightlight, but what I saw froze me in place. The doll. It was no longer in the corner of the room where we'd left it. It was sitting at the edge of Emma's bed, its cracked porcelain face staring directly at her. And then, as if it had been waiting for me to notice, it slowly, ever so slowly tilted its head toward me. I slammed the door shut. The next morning, I told Kelly everything. She didn't believe me at first, of course. Why would she? That the look on my face must have convinced her that I wasn't just messing around. We agreed to get rid of the doll, but when I went back to Emma's room, the doll was back in the corner, looking just as lifeless as the day I brought it home. That's when Emma started talking about her new friend. At first, we thought it was just her imagination, like any kid with an imaginary playmate. But when she described her friend, a little girl with long, dark hair and pale skin, I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. She said her friend liked to play with her toys at night, that she whispered stories to her while she slept. Kelly and I were freaked out, to say the least. We decided to take the doll back to the estate sale the next day. I didn't care about the $10, I just wanted it out of the house. But that night was the worst. I woke up to the sound of Emma screaming. I bolted out of bed, Kelly right behind me, and we ran into her room. She was sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face, pointing at the corner. "She's mad, Daddy, she's mad." My blood turned to ice. The doll was standing in the middle of the room. It wasn't slouched in the corner anymore. Its tiny porcelain feet were planted on the carpet, its blank eyes staring up at us. I grabbed Emma, and we ran out of the room. Kelly was in shock, but I wasn't waiting around to see what happened next. We grabbed the doll, threw it into a trash bag, and drove straight back to the house where we found it. The old woman was still there, closing up for the night. I didn't explain, I just handed her the bag and said we didn't want it anymore. She took it without a word, her expression unreadable. When we got home, the house felt different. Lighter, maybe. Quieter. Emma never mentioned her friend again, and the whispers, the shuffling, everything stopped. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear a faint giggle, just outside Emma's door. When we first moved into the house, it seemed perfect. A quiet neighborhood, plenty of space for the kids to play, and just far enough from the city that we could finally breathe. Our son, Ethan, was 8 and our daughter, Lily, had just turned 5. They loved their new rooms, especially Lily, who seemed enchanted by the bay window overlooking the backyard. It wasn't until the second week that the sound started. At first it was subtle creaks in the floorboards, the occasional thud in the middle of the night. I chalked it up to the house settling, the kind of noises you get used to in an old place. But it was hard to ignore when I started hearing the same sound every night. Around 2 a.m. there'd be this soft dragging noise from the hallway, always the same, like something heavy was being pulled across the floor. I tried to brush it off. My wife, Jenna, didn't seem to notice, and the kids were fast asleep. But one night I woke up to the sound louder than ever. I got out of bed, walked into the hall, and stood still, listening. The dragging stopped. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. There was a figure at the end of the hallway. Tall, motionless. It was standing in the shadows, just beyond the reach of the dim light from the kids' nightlights. I blinked, trying to focus, and in that instant it was gone. My heart pounded as I rushed to check the kids' rooms. Ethan was fine, snoring softly. But when I peeked into Lily's room, she was awake, sitting up in bed. "Daddy," she whispered, her eyes wide. "He was here again." I froze. "Who was here, sweetie?" "My friend," she said simply, hugging her stuffed bunny. "He watches me when I sleep." I tried to stay calm, but a cold dread settled into my stomach. "What does your friend look like?" She shrugged, her voice casual. "He's tall, and he doesn't talk." I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning I asked Ethan if he'd ever seen anything strange in the house, but he shook his head, too focused on his cereal to care. Jenna told me I was overthinking it. Kids have imaginary friends all the time, she said. But something about it didn't sit right with me. The noises continued, and every time I got up to investigate, there was nothing there. But Lily kept talking about her friend. She told me he liked to stand in the corner of her room, watching her sleep. I tried to laugh it off, tell myself it was just her imagination. But the more she talked about it, the more detailed her descriptions became. He had no face, she said, just dark, empty eyes. But one night I decided to stay awake, determined to catch whatever or whoever was causing the sounds. I sat in the dark, listening as the house creaked and groaned around me. And then at 2 a.m., sharp, the dragging began. I tiptoed into the hallway, holding my breath, and there it was again, that same figure, this time closer. I could make out more of it now, a tall, gaunt shadow, standing perfectly still. It didn't move, didn't breathe. It just watched. My skin prickled with fear, and I took a step toward it, and just like before, it vanished. No sound, no trace gone, as if it had never been there at all. I couldn't do this alone anymore. The next morning, I found a local paranormal investigator, someone who specialized in things like this. Jenna thought I was ridiculous, but after weeks of sleepless nights, I didn't care how crazy I sounded. The investigator, Dr. Moreno, arrived a few days later. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and an unsettling calm. She walked through the house, pausing in each room, running her hand along the walls like she could feel something I couldn't. When she reached Lily's room, she stopped. "There's something here," she said softly. "It's attached to this room." My heart sank. What does that mean? Dr. Moreno glanced at me, her expression grim. "It's an entity, a watcher. They're rare, but not unheard of." They're drawn to children, especially those who are sensitive to their presence. I felt sick. What does it want? It doesn't want to hurt them, she said, her voice quiet. It just watches. But that doesn't mean it's safe. I glanced over at Lily, who was sitting in the living room, coloring with Ethan. She looked so small, so innocent. I couldn't let this thing keep watching her. Can we get rid of it? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. Dr. Moreno hesitated. I'll try. The watchers, they're persistent. Sometimes they don't leave easily. She spent hours working, using all sorts of tools and rituals I didn't understand. The house felt colder as she worked, the air heavier. But when she finished, she gave me a small nod. It's done, she said, for now. That night, for the first time in weeks, the house was silent. No dragging sounds, no figure in the hallway. I started to relax, thinking maybe it was over. But around 3 a.m. I heard Lily's voice. Daddy, she called from her room. I bolted out of bed and rushed to her side. She was sitting up, her bunny clutched tight in her arms, tears streaming down her face. He's angry, she whispered. He doesn't like it when people try to make him leave. I felt a chill run down my spine. Who's angry, sweetie? My friend, she said, her voice trembling. He says he's not going anywhere. I looked around the room, my heart pounding, but there was nothing. No figure, no shadow. Just the oppressive weight of something unseen, lurking in the dark. And that's when I realized he wasn't just watching the kids anymore. Now, he was watching me. When I was 6 years old, something happened to me that still haunts me to this day. At the time, I didn't fully understand what I had experienced, but as I got older, the memories resurfaced, and the chilling details of that night became harder to ignore. It was late, maybe around 7 p.m. My mom had just finished making dinner, and I remember the smell of baked chicken wafting through the house. We lived in an old suburban neighborhood, the kind where the houses all look the same, and every crack in the walls has a story to tell. Our house was particularly old, with creaky floors and dim lighting, which only made things worse. That night, my mom was giving me a bath, like she always did. The bathroom was small, with pale blue tiles and a shower that never seemed to stop dripping. I was sitting in the tub, splashing around, while she stepped out to grab a towel. But I didn't think much of it. She was only going to be gone for a minute. But that minute, it changed everything. As soon as she left, I felt that weird, tingling sensation on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I stopped playing with my toys, suddenly feeling like I wasn't alone. The bathroom seemed darker, quieter. The only sound was the steady drip of water from the faucet, but even that felt like it was growing distant. Then, I started talking. To this day, I can't explain why. I remember saying, "Hi, Nana," as if she had just walked in. But my Nana had been dead for over a year. I loved her, though she used to watch me all the time, and I missed her. It felt natural to talk to her, even though she wasn't there. But the thing is, I wasn't alone. I could feel something standing in the corner of the room, watching me. I wasn't scared. Not yet. When my mom came back, she found me sitting there, still as a statue, staring at the corner. She asked me, "Who are you talking to?" "Nana," I replied, smiling. My mom went white. She didn't say anything, just grabbed me out of the tub and wrapped me in a towel. I could tell she was scared, but she didn't want to freak me out. We never talked about it again, at least not until years later. I was around 11 years old when things started getting worse. By then, I was terrified of being alone, especially at night. Our house had always felt off, but I couldn't explain why. Every night, I would sleep in my mom's bed, partly because I was scared, and partly because her room was at the back of the house, away from all the creepy noises the old place made. But one night, I woke up around 2 a.m. The room was pitch black, except for the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the blinds. I rolled over and saw my mom sleeping peacefully beside me, but something didn't feel right. That same feeling from years ago washed over me, the tingling on the back of my neck, the sense that I wasn't alone. I turned my head towards the door, and that's when I saw it. A figure standing in the doorway, its body outlined by the dim light from the hallway. It wasn't human, at least, not anymore. It was like a shadow, but more solid, like it was made of darkness itself. I could barely make out its features, but it felt familiar. It felt like Nana. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the figure, frozen in place. It didn't move, didn't say anything. It just stood there watching me. I wanted to scream, to wake my mom up, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed with fear. Slowly, the figure started moving, gliding towards the foot of the bed, and that's when I saw her eyes. They were hollow, empty, like two black voids staring into my soul. Finally, I managed to scream. My mom jolted awake, flipping on the bedside lamp. The figure was gone. Just like that. But the room didn't feel right. The air was thick, suffocating, like whatever had been there still lingered in the shadows. My mom tried to comfort me, telling me it was just a nightmare, but I knew better. It wasn't a dream. Things escalated after that night. I started seeing shadows in the corners of my vision, hearing whispers when I was alone. One time while I was watching TV in the living room, I felt a cold hand brush against the back of my neck. I spun around, but no one was there. My mom never admitted it, but I think she felt it too. There were nights when I'd wake up to find her sitting at the edge of the bed, staring at the door, as if she was waiting for something or someone. The final straw came when I was about 13. We were in the kitchen, having dinner, when I suddenly heard a loud bang from the bathroom. My mom and I froze, staring at each other, the sound echoing through the house. Slowly, we made our way to the bathroom, my heart pounding in my ears. The mirror was shattered. Glass covered the sink and floor, but there was no explanation for how it happened. We hadn't heard anything fall, and the mirror had been perfectly fine moments before. I felt that familiar chill run down my spine as I stared at the broken pieces of glass. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every whisper of wind sent my heart racing. I knew I wasn't alone, that whatever had been haunting me for years was still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting. I don't know what it was or why it chose to follow me, but I do know one thing: it wasn't Nana. I moved out of that house years ago, but sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still feel it. That presence, watching, waiting. I don't talk about it much anymore, but every once in a while, I'll catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. A shadow, a figure, and I know deep down it's never really gone.